Dr. Zane Hawk had spent the better part of a decade on Mars, immersing himself in the harsh landscape and studying the planet's flora. A man of patience, he had dedicated his career to understanding the mysteries of the red planet, how its barren, desolate soil might one day be coaxed to yield life. Mars was a harsh mistress, and Zane had learned to love her despite her unyielding nature. It was on this vast, arid planet that he had found a sense of purpose. Until the day everything changed. It was a day like any other when Zane set off into the Valles Marineris, the Martian canyon that stretched over 4,000 kilometers across the surface of the planet. It was a location he had visited before, both out of scientific curiosity and for the thrill of exploration. The canyon's geological history fascinated him. The layers of sediment trapped in its walls held the secrets of Mars' past, clues to the planet's transformation. Yet despite his many excursions into its depths, there was still much Zane had yet to uncover. This time, however, was different. He had been tracking seismic activity in the region for a week. There had been a series of minor tremors recorded on the sensors, and Zane was eager to investigate their source. As he ventured deeper into the canyon, he could feel the ground beneath him shifting. The air was thin, and the wind howled through the jagged cliffs that surrounded him. His boots crunched across the gravelly terrain, and his breath came in short bursts, the cold Martian air biting at his skin. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gave way. Zane's heart skipped a beat as his foot slipped into a crevice, and before he could react, he was tumbling downward, the world spinning around him. He barely had time to brace himself as he fell, the rocks scraping against his suit. For a split second, there was only the sensation of falling, the dizzying swirl of motion, and then silence. He landed hard, his body crashing onto a soft patch of Martian dust. His helmet's HUD flickered momentarily, displaying a flashing warning. Damaged suits were a common risk when navigating the chasms of Mars. Zane groaned, rolling to his side as he pushed himself up. His heart raced in his chest, but he was alive. The fall had not broken him, just bruised his body. As Zane stood, the silence was overwhelming. There were no sounds of life, only the echo of his own breath inside his suit. He checked his suit's readout for damage. The helmet was cracked, but his internal systems were intact. The real problem, however, was that he was deep in a chasm, isolated. There was no way to climb back up easily. He activated his communication system to call for help, but the signal was weak, the canyon's walls blocking any clear transmission. His best bet was to keep moving and find a way out on his own. Zane pressed forward, carefully navigating through the jagged rocks. The further he went, the more he felt an inexplicable sense of awe. The walls of the chasm seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive with energy. The air felt denser here, warmer even, than the frigid Martian surface outside. He could see faint glows illuminating the path ahead, not from any natural source, but something far more alien. His heart thudded louder with each step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zane stumbled upon something that made his breath catch in his throat. The structure was enormous, an intricate crystalline formation, standing in stark contrast to the harsh, dry landscape of Mars. It shimmered with an eerie, pulsating light, as if it were breathing. The material wasn't like anything he had ever seen, smooth, almost liquid in appearance, yet solid to the touch. It radiated a faint warmth, enough to feel when Zane placed his hand on it, though he couldn't explain why. The light emitted from the structure, illuminating the walls around it, revealing detailed alien symbols etched into the surface. He stepped back, wide-eyed. His scientific curiosity had been piqued, but his instinct told him something was wrong. There was a presence here, a hum barely perceptible, deep within his bones. It felt as though the structure was watching him, waiting for him. Zane pulled out his scanner, running an analysis on the object. His instruments went wild, beeping and flashing with unfamiliar data. The object's material composition was unlike anything Earth had ever discovered. It was neither metal nor mineral, but something entirely new. His mind raced with possibilities. Could this be the artifact that ancient theorists had speculated about? Was this the key to understanding Mars's mysterious history? For hours, Zane examined the structure, taking readings, snapping photos, and cataloging every detail. The alien symbols seemed to glow brighter the longer he observed them, as if responding to his presence. A sense of awe washed over him. This was a discovery far beyond anything he had ever imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon outside, Zane knew he couldn't leave. His curiosity was overwhelming, and the pull of the structure was too great. He set up camp near the formation, hoping to make sense of what he had uncovered by the morning. But sleep did not come easily. In the dead of night, as Zane lay in his tent, his mind spinning with thoughts of the structure, a voice echoed in his head. "You have found it." Zane's eyes shot open, his heart pounding in his chest. He sat up, breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the darkened tent. The voice wasn't external, it was inside his mind. He didn't know whether it was a hallucination or something else entirely, but it felt real, too real. His hands trembled as he fumbled for the communicator, attempting to contact the base, but before he could speak, the voice continued. "You were not meant to find this, but it is now your burden. The debt must be repaid." Zane froze. His breath caught in his throat as the words echoed in his mind, growing louder, more insistent. What was happening? He was alone. There was no one else here. The voice paused, then added, "Humanity owes you a favor." The words hung in the air, suffocating him. He didn't understand what was happening, or why this was happening to him. His scientific mind scrambled for explanations. Was it some sort of neurochemical imbalance, brought on by the isolation, the stress, the exhaustion? But no matter how much he tried to rationalize it, the voice lingered, its presence undeniable. Zane stumbled out of his tent, desperate for answers. His boots crunched on the rocky terrain as he approached the glowing structure. The voice grew louder the closer he got, urging him, pulling him forward. "You have found the key, Zane Hawk, and now the debt must be paid." He reached out, his fingers brushing against the cool, crystalline surface. For a moment nothing happened, but then the symbols etched into the structure flared to life, glowing brighter and more intensely, casting an eerie light across the landscape. The ground beneath him trembled, and Zane stumbled back, his heart racing in panic. The hum that had once been barely noticeable was now a loud, resonant sound that seemed to reverberate through his entire body. The voice spoke once more. "Release us." Zane's mind spun. The words seemed to come from everywhere, from the structure itself, from the very air around him. It was as if something ancient, something powerful, was trying to make itself known. With his pulse racing and fear coursing through him, Zane stepped away from the structure. He didn't know what was happening, but it was clear that whatever this was, it wasn't simply an artifact. It was alive. And now it was demanding something from him. As he stumbled back, trying to make sense of the events unfolding around him, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The voice in his head was no longer an invitation. It had become a command, and whatever favor humanity owed, whatever debt had been incurred, it was about to be paid. Zane Hawk stood in the darkened Martian landscape, the alien structure looming ahead of him, its glowing symbols casting strange shadows across the rocky floor. The air felt thick, vibrating with a subtle yet ever-present hum, an energy that resonated through his body and mind. His pulse raced as he tried to make sense of the situation, his thoughts scattered, not knowing whether to scream or remain silent. "Release us," the voice had commanded. Zane's mind reeled. The words echoed in his skull, far too vivid and personal, as though someone, or something, was inside his head. The hum of the structure had grown louder, reverberating in his bones. It was almost as though the object, the artifact, was breathing, alive in ways that made his skin crawl. He stumbled backward, the ground beneath his feet trembling slightly. The sensation was unnerving, as if the very planet itself were responding to the artifact's presence. Zane had never encountered anything like this before, not in any of his research on Mars or Earth. Stay calm, he muttered to himself, attempting to ground himself in the moment. He was a scientist, after all, a trained professional, not a man to be so easily shaken. But what he was facing wasn't science. It was something beyond human understanding. Despite his training, he could not shake the primal terror settling in his gut. The voice had been too clear, too real to ignore. He could still feel the echo of its command, like a haunting melody that lingered in his consciousness. "You have found it. You must open it. You must release us." Zane's breath hitched. What did it mean? Release who? Or what? There was no clear answer, just the commanding tone of the voice that refused to leave him. His thoughts raced, darting from one possibility to the next. Could the artifact be some kind of ancient alien prison? Or perhaps it was a tool for communicating with beings from beyond the stars? Either way, it was clear that something or someone was inside, waiting to be freed. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think rationally. The voice wasn't hallucination, he knew that much. The voice was too coherent, too purposeful to be a figment of his imagination. It felt as if it were speaking from somewhere deeper within him, from some untapped part of his subconscious. It was as if the artifact had chosen him. Zane turned away from the structure and scrambled back toward the cliffs, the chasm that had swallowed him up moments before. He needed to get out, needed to clear his head. The communicator in his suit crackled faintly in his ear, but it was still useless. Its signal overwhelmed by the Martian atmosphere. He couldn't think straight. He needed to reach the base and tell someone about what he'd discovered, about what was happening. But as he stumbled toward the exit, something caught his eye. A glowing, faintly pulsating trail on the ground led deeper into the canyon, just beyond where he had originally fallen. It was almost imperceptible at first, a subtle shimmer that blended with the rocks. But now, as his eyes adjusted, Zane could see it more clearly. The trail seemed to connect the chasm to the alien structure, like a thread of energy extending outward. Was it a path? Or perhaps something else? A conduit? The hum from the structure deepened, growing louder, as if beckoning him. Zane hesitated for only a moment before he followed the trail. The temptation was too strong, his curiosity as powerful as it had ever been. His steps felt like they were leading him somewhere, like the very ground beneath him was guiding him toward the unknown. He walked through the maze of rocks and cliffs, his boots crunching on the jagged terrain, until he finally reached the base of the glowing formation. It was then that the humming intensified again, sharper now, as though the structure were preparing for something. Without thinking, Zane stepped closer to the alien formation. His hand reached out once more, this time not hesitating, not second-guessing. The moment his fingertips brushed against the cool, crystalline surface, something inside the structure shifted. The ground beneath him rumbled, just as it had earlier. The air vibrated with an almost tangible force, and then a low, resonating voice spoke, louder this time, booming within his mind. "You must unlock it. You must open it." Zane's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the power emanating from the structure, sizzling through the air like static electricity. He stepped back, hands shaking, but the voice followed him, relentless. "You were chosen. You will be the key to what lies beyond. The debt has been paid, Zane Hawk. It is your destiny." Zane's head spun. He wanted to run. He needed to run. But his feet were frozen to the spot. There was no escape. Not from this, not from whatever this was. He looked at his hand, still resting on the surface of the structure, and for the briefest of moments he thought he saw a flicker of something, an image or a memory, flash across his mind. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head. The image was gone. Then it hit him. He had been standing there for too long. He had made contact with the structure, and now it was demanding something from him. He couldn't escape it. He couldn't stop it. The power was inside him, inside his head, racing through his veins, filling his mind with visions, with thoughts that were not his own. The voice spoke again, this time louder, sharper, insistent. "You must release the seal. Open the way. Open it, or we will be trapped forever." Zane's stomach twisted. He couldn't understand everything, but the implications were clear. This was no ordinary object. It was an artifact of unimaginable power, and whatever lay inside it, whatever force had been imprisoned within, was desperate to escape. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled once more, only this time the vibration seemed to spread outward, reverberating through the canyon. The entire structure began to glow brighter, more intensely, until Zane was almost blinded by the light. A low, deafening sound filled the air, and the Martian sky above flickered ominously. Zane staggered backward, trying to shield his eyes from the radiance. The world felt like it was shifting, warping around him. The ground cracked open beneath his feet, and for a split second he thought he was going to fall again, this time into an abyss that he couldn't escape. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the vibration ceased. The world returned to stillness. But Zane could still hear the hum, faint but persistent. It felt like the structure was calling to him, like it had unlocked something within him, something he couldn't control. Zane took a deep breath. His mind raced, and in that moment he understood the full weight of what he had uncovered. This wasn't just an artifact. This wasn't just a simple discovery. This was the beginning of something much bigger, much darker than he could have imagined. And the voice, it wasn't just a hallucination, not just a byproduct of isolation. It was real, it was speaking to him, and whatever it was asking for, it wasn't going to stop until it had what it wanted. The debt, the favor. It all made sense now. Humanity owed something to this ancient power, and Zane had been chosen to pay the price. Zane stumbled back, shaking his head as if he could clear the thoughts racing through his mind. He needed to leave, to get back to the base. He needed help. He couldn't deal with this alone. But as he turned to go, a final voice whispered in his mind, sending a chill down his spine. There is no escaping the debt. The words lingered in his head, drowning out everything else. Zane didn't know what it meant, but deep down he knew one thing for certain. His life had changed forever. And whatever lay ahead, humanity was no longer the same. The discovery had only just begun. Zane Hawk barely slept that night, his mind still spinning from the overwhelming sensations he had experienced at the alien structure, refused to quiet down. The echoes of the voice, the urgency of its demand, haunted him even in his exhausted state. He had to understand what he had uncovered, but it felt like the answers were just beyond his grasp. As if they were being held back by some unseen force, the Martian sky outside his shelter had begun to lighten, but the air remained chilled, as it always did in the early hours of the morning. Zane sat at the small workstation he had set up in his makeshift lab, a collection of monitors and equipment that had previously been used for harmless botanical studies, but today it was different. He wasn't studying Martian plants or analyzing soil samples today. He was trying to understand something much bigger, much older, something alien. The alien structure was still out there, looming in the distance, pulsing with energy. Even though Zane was far from it now, he could still feel its presence, like a distant hum inside his bones. It wasn't just a physical sensation, it was mental, emotional. A deep, gnawing feeling that wouldn't go away. He keyed in commands on the console, bringing up the footage he had recorded of the structure, everything from the glowing symbols to the seismic tremors that had racked the landscape when the artifact had activated. There was so much he didn't understand, so much that didn't make sense. The voice had been clear, release us. But from what, and who, or what was he supposed to be releasing? His head throbbed with the weight of these questions. Zane's fingers hovered over the console. He hadn't shared his discovery with anyone back at base yet. He couldn't, not until he understood what he was dealing with. If the artifact was what he thought it was, a key to some ancient, powerful force, it needed to be handled with extreme caution. But the longer he sat there, the more he realized that caution might not be enough. The voice from the structure, so persistent in his mind, had made something clear. Humanity owed something to it. Zane shivered, his fingers trembling as he glanced over at the map of Mars that was displayed on the screen. The structure was not in a location of any particular significance in the known scientific databases. It wasn't near any ancient Martian ruins or remnants of a lost civilization, yet somehow it had been waiting for him. The thought sent a chill through his chest. Just as he was about to continue his analysis, the radio crackled to life, jolting him out of his thoughts. Dr. Hawk, this is Mission Control. We've been getting some strange readings from your location. We need to know what's going on out there. It was Amelia Hayes, a senior scientist from the Interstellar Research Federation. Zane had worked with her for years, but they had always kept their relationship strictly professional. There was no time for personal matters in their line of work, especially with the pressures of Mars colonization hanging over them. But now, something in her voice sounded different, urgent, almost panicked. Zane took a deep breath, steadying himself. Amelia, you need to listen to me. I've found something extraordinary. I can't explain it over the radio. It's a discovery unlike anything we've ever encountered. There was a long pause before Amelia's voice came through again. Zane, we're worried about you. You're alone out there and your signals are becoming more erratic. You're not just seeing things, are you? Zane closed his eyes, resisting the urge to snap at her. He knew that tone. It was the same tone she used when she thought he was losing control of his faculties. The isolation, the stress, the strange events surrounding Mars were starting to take their toll. He'd heard the whispers, but he couldn't afford to believe those rumors, not now. "I'm not hallucinating," he said slowly. "This is real, Amelia. I need you to trust me. I need you to come out here. You won't believe it until you see it for yourself." There was another pause on the line. He could hear the faint sound of typing in the background. Amelia was probably consulting with the Federation's higher-ups, debating what to do next. Finally, she spoke again. "Zane, we can't just send people out there based on a hunch. We need more data, more concrete proof. You have to give us something more than just your word." Zane felt a pang of frustration. He had no choice. He had to show them, even if he wasn't fully sure of what he was dealing with. "I'll send you my findings. I'll send you everything, but you need to get here fast. I'm not sure how long this will stay dormant." Amelia's voice softened, as if she could hear the fear creeping into his words. "We'll prepare a crew and leave in 6 hours, but you need to stay calm. We'll meet you halfway, okay? Zane, we need to make sure you're safe. Please, just hold tight." He nodded, though she couldn't see him. "I'll wait, but hurry." Zane ended the transmission and collapsed back into his chair. The weight of everything he had uncovered bore down on him like a stone. The structure, the voice, the debt. Humanity owed something, but what if the cost was far higher than anyone could imagine? The 6 hours passed in a blur. Zane didn't know if he was pacing or sitting. His mind raced with endless scenarios. Could they control whatever was locked inside the artifact? Or was it already too late? The voice was still with him, still insistent. "Release us. Open it. Free us." Each time the voice spoke, Zane felt more and more like he was losing his grip on reality. His scientific training, which had always been a steady anchor in the chaos of the universe, now felt like a distant memory. The things he had learned about biology, chemistry, physics were all useless now. He wasn't just exploring Mars anymore. He was dealing with something that defied every law of science he had ever known. The faint hum from the structure seemed to grow louder as the hours ticked by. It was as if it were calling to him, urging him to return. He couldn't ignore it. It felt like a magnetic pull, like his body and mind were aligned with the artifact's frequency. Something inside him was awakening, a connection, a compulsion he couldn't fully understand. Finally, just as the sun began to dip below the Martian horizon, the Federation crew arrived. A small shuttle approached, kicking up dust as it descended onto the rocky terrain. Zane squinted into the glare of the descending craft, his heart racing. He stood at the base of the canyon, at the edge of the chasm where the structure lay just beyond. The shuttle's hatch opened, and Amelia Hayes stepped out, flanked by a team of scientists and engineers. Zane quickly approached them, desperate to explain what had been happening, but Amelia held up a hand to stop him. "Show us," she said. "We're ready." Zane led them through the narrow path that cut through the canyon, the glowing trail still faintly visible underfoot. He didn't know what to say to them. They wouldn't understand. No one would. But he had no choice now but to show them what he had found. As they arrived at the alien structure, the crew paused, their eyes wide with astonishment. The artifact pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting eerie reflections on their faces. Zane could see the disbelief in their eyes, the same disbelief that he had felt when he first stumbled upon it. But now he knew the truth. This wasn't just an alien artifact. It was a doorway. Amelia stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zane, what is this?" Zane's eyes were fixed on the glowing structure, his voice hoarse. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not just a discovery. It's a message, and humanity owes it something." As the words left his mouth, the ground trembled once again. A deep, resonating pulse shook the very air around them, and Zane felt the structure respond to his words, as if it were waiting for something. The hum grew louder, and then, as if in answer to his statement, the glowing symbols on the surface of the artifact flared with blinding intensity. Amelia turned to him, her eyes wide with realization. "Zane, what have we unleashed?" But Zane didn't have an answer. Not anymore. He wasn't sure whether this was the beginning of humanity's greatest triumph or its darkest hour.